efficient, because you can have cohesion, but also exclusion, I think, is going to be a much bigger issue with Christianity that does not necessarily exist to the same extent with progressivism. I would admit fully, I think if we're having a good faith discussion, that yes, when it comes to progressivism, there is probably more ambiguity and more of like learning as you go. But I think that is a sign of humility and honesty with how these things work. And I think, like, sure, it's true that with a preordained system of values and ethics with Christianity that are very hyper specifically defined, or Islam or anything else, you might have more concrete parameters to judge it based on. But I think the concreteness is not sufficient to say this is a better system than something that's maybe a little more ambiguous and you have to figure it out over time.
But what you would at least say, yeah, sorry, one more question, Easy, sorry. Would you at least concede that cohesion would actually be a necessary precondition if it were to be better?
Sure.
Okay. So you would say, at least give us a point that we're ahead of you on the preconditions for what might be better.
And Evan said earlier,
in a debate on Rattlesnake TV on Christianity versus progressivism, these two progressives, Evan and Adam and Ev, debate the Christians, Jim Bob and Easy, in what I think was actually a pretty good back and forth. It was pretty civil, but even with the civility, Jim Bob and Easy absolutely owned these two. But don't just take my word for it. Watch the debate for yourselves and come to your own conclusions.
A society that has one group of dominant people force out the ones that they call harmony. Like they just cast them out and say, you guys are incompatible. If you said virtue is what emerges to produce harmony, then harmony doesn't actually necessitate.
I mean, as a species, though, I'm not talking about a specific group of people being harmonized or working together only within a specific boundary that's being set. And I think, like, when you talk about what is virtue, as I was saying, I think it's something that is distilled, and we discover more fine ways of defining it as time goes on, because our definitions now are not going to be the same definitions a progressive from 100 years ago would have given, or 100 years before that. And I think virtue, in a very broad sense, is a way of conducting yourself and thinking about the world and viewing the world that is conducive to having as harmonious of a society as possible, which includes as much of the human species as possible. So I think being exclusionary is by definition going to be against how we would define that.
Okay, but let me ask you a more methodology question. If there's two positions and they're equal in force and numbers inside of a society, not the world, let's say the US, and one makes a claim about where we ought to go and another makes a claim where we ought to go, and both say they're virtuous, according to your standard, what method are you going to use to determine which one's virtuous?
Whichever ones are like most conducive to the goal which I laid out, which is having a society which has everyone using their freedom in a way that contributes to the harm. Like, it's almost like a system that reinforces itself. So you want to have people behaving in a way such that society is cohesive. And if you have someone putting forward a definition of virtue that is antithetical to that, I think that would become evident.
Okay, cool. So if I want a Christian society and I want it cohesive, like you said, that's a good thing. I'm not sure how you're going to argue using force to forcefully remove anyone who's not cohesive to my paradigm.
When did I say anything about using force? Like, Evan even said Christianity and progressivism.
Well, I'm saying I'm using those means, right? Because you just said, I said the hypothetical is there's an equal amount of people who are fighting for their paradigm, right, inside of a country, to say take control over the government and inform their laws based on their paradigm. I said seeking harmony and cohesion. One side could say, yeah, we're seeking cohesion. The way we're going to achieve cohesion is to remove the ones who are incompatible with this cohesiveness. So
that goes against my definition of progressivism, though, which is that you want to have it be as inclusive as possible in terms of the entire human species.
But if things are incompatible, now you're not arguing for cohesion. So is it possible that
there's processes to resolve disputes, which I think in and of themselves can be very healthy and useful.
Are there incompatible
to hash those things out?
Are there incompatible cultures and sets of virtues?
There's certain facets of certain cultures that would be incompatible with each other. I think using broad strokes to say this culture and this culture are incompatible kind of neglects some of the nuances within each culture.
Okay,
I think it's also important to note that the goal would be to not just exclude exclude those cultures in the creation of a more harmonious society. You would want to attempt to rectify whatever ills or injustices are present within those cultures. So the goal of progressivism wouldn't just be to say this culture has maybe an incompatible way of, for example, treating gay people. Let's remove them from society. You would want to incorporate them with the goal of actually correcting whatever harmful behavior or ill that is.
But Evan, you used the word justice. It sounds like you're making the same argument as your partner here, but just moving the claim over to injustice. I'm going to ask the same question. If a one set of group of people, let's say in this case Christians, let's say the state, the U.S. is, let's just say even. Let's say there's 50% Christians and there's 50% progressives, and they disagree on what injustice is. How are you gonna through the progressive lens, which is advocating for pluralism, how are you going to reconcile that kind of difference if fundamentally the Christian disagrees with your definition, Adam, of virtue, and Evan, your definition of injustice?
Yeah, I think that there's some.
Before he gets to his answer, I also want to point out, what does he mean by, well, we would incorporate them into our society, but correct the behavior? Well, how exactly would you correct the behavior? That would have been a question that I would have asked him.
To be some acknowledgement of it. It sounds like what you're getting at is just the paradox of intolerance. I think there's going to be some acknowledgement that in order to create a more tolerant and inclusive society, you have to again attempt to rectify through both rigorous debate and empiricism on things that we do have universal agreement on. And that's not to say that those ethics are inherently objective, but we have acknowledgement that there's going to be universal interests on very basic rudimentary things like giving people for example, just like stable income or living a more stable material life.
So what if there's a part of the society that's fighting for their system of justice, and they think it's justified for them to be nude and indecent in public? That means masturbating, let's say, more specifically in public. Do you guys take a pluralistic approach and say, no, we have to accommodate the public masturbator? He's just living his life, bro.
No, like I said earlier, I don't think just anything that is done with the use of freedom is inherently good in and of itself. It depends to what end it's being done, why it's being done, and how it impacts. Like,
would you
I
stop
want to
them?
add to what Evan was saying. When there's an overlap between groups that differ, you want to focus on that overlap, use that overlap as the foundation, and then anything that threatens that overlap and threatens the cohesion and their harmoniousness should be viewed as something that you want to try to.
Would you interrupt and intervene on the harmoniousness of a public masturbator?
Yes, if it's because I would say that public masturbation is going to be harmful to, for example, children. Because it may encourage, for example, children to interact sexually with other adults, and that leads to exploitative practices.
Do you believe in teaching kids sexual education that's highly detailed through books?
I mean, it's going to be, the devil's going to be in the details in terms of.
Do you believe in teaching children about masturbation?
Depends on what age. Like I'd say around middle school is when you normally.
So are you okay with a public masturbator? Hold on.
I think the way you teach them is pretty important, right?
Are you okay with a public masturbator then, as long as it was in front of the age that you mentioned?
No, I don't think showing masturbation.
Yeah, in a book, it's teaching.
It's
in a book or some guy in
say it's a form of education.
What's the difference between a guy? He just call himself a teacher.
In which they're being not all forms
perceived. He should just call himself a teacher. Oh my God, that's hilarious. I love this right here, how Jim Bobs is quickly pointing out the hypocrisy of their worldview. Like to them, a public, how do you say, self-pleasurer, well, that's indecent. No, we can't have that. But these people, when you bring up, well, what about showing a book to young kids and teaching them about self-pleasure? Well, then they're like, well, the devil's in the details. There's nuance there and blah, 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 blah. Good on Jim Bob for immediately pointing out the hypocrisy of these progressives.
What if you just call him a teacher?
Well, it would be, we would have to look at like the form of education. Not all forms
And like
of
we have to acknowledge there are social contexts that affect how people perceive and interact with things. You can't just say that
also,
a book that teaches something is the same as a dude on the subway.
Okay, what's wrong with the teacher?
And also any person who is engaging in public masturbation explicitly with the intention or even just the vulnerability of having children see that, they have something that I would find reprehensible because of the opportunities of exploitation towards children.
Okay,
and the
let's
overall
take
harm.
the age. Let's just do this again. Let's take the age you find it totally fine to use books and pictures to teach kids
I never say pictures.
Well,
I didn't necessarily say pictures. I think that again, and this is what I meant when I said the devil is in the details.
I'm getting details. Yeah, I'm giving details.
Okay, then what exactly do these books say, and what exactly
have you seen some of the books in some of the libraries and classes that teach explicitly through photographs, through illustration, teach kids how to masturbate, how to perform sodomy, and more, right? Are you okay with teaching kids at a certain age in schools those practices? Yes or no, under a secular view, under your progressive view? Is that progress?
I would have to look at whatever the specific illustrations are, and
a drawing of a guy jerking off, dude.
Yeah, and I would also need to know exactly what age and what the purpose of this education is.
So if the purpose of this education was to indoctrinate the children to be more tolerant toward the LGBTQ community, well, then that's okay. But if you're just some random creep on the street, yeah, no way. That is against my moral ethics.
That like there's we need to have some just rudimentary education for children at, for example, maybe the age of 13 or so, to just acknowledge what masturbation is. But I'm not sure it's necessary to do any sort of illustration. So in that case, no, I don't think it's necessary.
How about would you teach homosexuality in your progressive utopia?
When you say teach, do you mean like instructing people to behave in this way, or just telling them it exists?
Let me ask you. You remember sex education, right? You're biologically you're learning about sex, right?
It's been a while, but
but would you guys include homosexual activity in the context of teaching sex biologically?
To the extent that there are homosexual people that are present in the people learning, I'd want to teach them how to safely engage in the behaviors they're probably going to engage in. That's different from saying you ought to engage in these behaviors. I think providing people with education on how things work is different than subjecting them to those experiences. Okay, so you would teach kids of 13 or over, or somewhere in there, how to properly and safely put a penis in a butthole? Is that what you're saying? If they're going to engage in it regardless, I would rather have them do it in a way that is somewhat safe rather than just willy-nilly based on the internet or something. Okay.
Right. So if, for example, if it just includes the education that, hey, wearing condoms can protect you from things like STDs, and we see a reduction of STDs because of education implementation like that, then yes.
So from a Christian,
and I think, wait, and I think it's important to
so it's reducing disease is good, right?
What you are inferring, right, is that the absence of this education would lead to, for example, less overall engagement of this behavior, but you haven't actually demonstrated that. And generally, we do see that societies with comprehensive sex education and economic, for example, access to effective contraception are going to have less STDs.
So do you think it's a good thing to reduce sexually transmitted diseases, though?
Generally, yeah. I think it's something that most people want to avoid, and as such, we should, make.
Should we teach the best way to avoid it in school?
Yeah, absolutely.
So abstinence, we should teach abstinence in high school.
We should teach abstinence, but we should also.
Is that a progressive virtue, or is that a Christian virtue?
Well, it is.
It's the freedom to choose which one you want to engage in.
Is abstinence? A simple question.
Well, abstinence, not abstinence only, but you understand that. And I was just in, school not too long ago, but they still told you that abstinence is the best and most effective way of preventing STDs. And that's, of course, the case. That's, of course, true. But you don't let that be the only form of education. You also provide effective access to contraception and ensure that if, for example, teenagers, which they do engage in sex, are going to engage in sex with each other, that they're informed on how to do it safely. They're informed about consent. in order to prevent and decrease overall harm, which is going to be exploitation. And I think one thing that we may be missing is Adam and I aren't libertarians. We're progressives. We can acknowledge that just because someone is quote unquote of the age or quote unquote engaging in a free behavior, that it's not necessarily going to be conducive to the benefit of themselves or those around them. So we would still advocate, again, pushing a society to engage in behavior.
Okay, let me ask you, Evan and Adam, and maybe Easy, you can jump in on this. Sorry to hog it, but let's say there was a phenomenon where people started using their genitals on objects like trees and things like that. Now, if that emerged, Adam, because an emergent, what's emergent is virtuous. If that emerged as a phenomenon, would you then?
I didn't say what's emergent is inherently virtuous. It points us in a direction. You have to see what direction we're moving in on average. But continue your question.
Okay, so the question is, if people started using their sexual organs on objects and trees and things like this, would you then demand to add that to the sexual education? How to safely?
Are you asking if like 50% of society just randomly one day is like, we're going to start fucking trees, or just
even 6% of the school?
If it's like statistically significant, you'd probably want to address it in some way. And first of all, tell people this is probably extremely dangerous and not safe. It's if other people are seeing it, it's probably very weird to them and psychologically scarring. And there's
what
probably
if it made them happy? What if it made them happy? Wouldn't it be virtuous to
if someone like in the privacy of their own home has like a little tree or a plant or something? I would say that's amoral. Like I personally would find it weird on like a emotional level, obviously. But
so what you find
one quick thing, I don't want to cut you off. Just really quick, want to interject this. I understand that we have a 2.5 hours, 3 hours here, and these are interesting conversations, and I'm happy to engage in them. But I want to make sure we're not spending the next 2 hours like, what about this weird sexual scenario? What would happen here? Like,
well, there's a lot of sexual scenarios going on, dude. There's a lot of
bizarre, other facets of society.
I understand, but I'm talking about decency, and I want to know how the progressive model will manage.
What do you define decency? I'm curious as what you define as decency and how that's explicitly entailed from the Christian world.
Real quick, these people, they always want to, when you bring up these hypotheticals to bring things to their logical conclusion, like the logical possibilities of what could happen underneath the opposing person's worldview, they always like, okay, listen, I don't want to spend the next time arguing about, the tree scenario or the dead grandma scenario that Jim Bob and Andrew Wilson like to bring up. You always like, well, can we move off of this and not talk about? Well, the thing is that like the slippery slope argument is real. And the thing is that once we started like pretty much accepting all of these like alternate sexualities, well, then all of these other weird kinks and fetishes started to bring their way up to the surface. Like people are into weird freaking crap. And so it's only logical to bring this up and talk about this because it's arguable that progressivism is what led to all this weird crap.
Defined.
Indecency or decency?
Decency.
Either.
Yeah. Why is decency entailed from Christianity, and how is it defined by Christianity?
Well, decency would probably be an entailment of modesty and humility. So, for instance, if you looked at someone and they had their ass out in public, like super thong, jiggling around in a public scenario, under your view, they're not doing anything. They're just living their life. They're dancing. Look away would be the libertarian and the progressive remedy to that. There would be no problem with it ultimately. So from our view, we would say that's indecent because it's not humble. You're not, especially a woman, you're not covered up. You're like, there's a threshold at which you're going to be using your buttocks for a very specific reason, which is sexual, right? And so if you agree that going outside in public and shaking your ass around like you're on all fours and stuff, that's not public masturbation according to you, right? So you wouldn't really police that in a progressive society, right? Under a Christian view, that kind of indecency, right, would be examined, and we go, oh, under our view, we would actually justify the use of force to remove indecency. But you
So
guys
are you
don't really
talking
have
about someone wearing a thong and walking into an elementary school, or like someone at the beach wearing a bikini? Like, I feel like the devil is really in the details here, and there are going to be like certain gray areas you have to iron out through some kind of consensus building and some kind of like what exactly is the threshold of what is appropriate clothing and what isn't. I don't think these are very strictly, cleanly defined concepts.
Okay.
To argue that real quick, because they like to bring up the beach scenarios. Yeah, you can actually go too far with what type of beach wear you wear at the beach. Like there are, like for instance, as a man, like, you know, I wear swim trunks. They're just shorts basically, and I could swim in those. However, if I'm a man and I went to the beach in a thong with a little and my a little bikini thong or G-string or whatever, a Speedo if you will, and then my bulge is freaking just popping out right there, some people might find that indecent. Same thing with a woman. With the woman, you could find a bathing suit that is not indecent, that pretty much covers what needs to be covered, but yet you're also comfortable enough to go swimming in. There are some women, though, that take it too far and have these really small bikinis where it's a thong in the back and their whole butt showing. You know, their breasts are barely covered, like the bare minimum of coverization. And they're wearing that, obviously, not because, well, this is the most comfortable wear for me to go swimming, but because I want to get attention from this. So yeah, they like to bring up the beach scenario, but you can make a very well an argument that you could also be indecent at the beach.
Let's say the threshold isn't as exhaustive as you'd like, right? Let's just say but the intent was to find the threshold, even if it wasn't the highest resolution threshold, right? Because even under your view, there would be those thresholds, right? It would be like, we're almost there. What I'm saying is that there would actually be an intended pursuit of that threshold. I'm saying under your view, there's no reason to pursue policing indecency at all, as long as what is it, Evan and Adam? As long as it's not harming someone, right?
Generally, as long as it's not harming the broader social project, social cohesion. Yeah, sure. So like that's why I would say if someone's wearing that in a school, then I have a lot more questions than if someone's wearing a bikini on Miami Beach.
Right. So now you've declared that there are certain places where certain things are decent and certain places they're situational, indecent, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Under a progressive view, I'm not sure. It seems a bit more clear for a Christian paradigm to be able to kind of traverse those things. And I'm not sure it's clear at all from your paradigm how you're going to navigate what's indecent and when. Yeah. Being that your ultimate priority under your paradigm for both of you is let people do what they want, right? Let them pursue their own happiness, essentially.
I wouldn't say that that's the ultimate. I would say that that's one a feature of it, but I would say that the ultimate, I guess, core value of the paradigm would be to rectify injustices. So I'd say progressivism broadly doesn't seek necessarily to advocate new ways in which humanity explore, I guess, random sexual virtues, but rather evaluating ways in which society is already feeling real ramifications from real social phenomenons, from real problems that actually exist, and attempting with both reason and empiricism, how do we actually rectify those?
I also have a real quick question for you, Jim Bob, just to interject real quick. So like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like one thing that you're pointing out is that with Christianity, a lot of these thresholds are maybe more clearly defined and more clearly designated than in a progressive society. And I would ask you if there was some other religion that had more clearly defined, more strict requirements or definitions of what counts as decency, would that make it on those grounds better than Christianity? I'm genuinely curious.
No, I wouldn't say because of the
specificity of threshold.
Yeah. Like that could be done under like Islam, right? We would say, they're pretty clear on the things. Then it would probably expand, from my view, it would expand to, we would get into epistemology and metaethics and deeper things that wouldn't be in this debate. But yeah, Adam, if that came up, if you guys were Muslims right now, we would debate something much larger than merely, is there any normative authority? That's kind of what I'm pointing to in general, is that I actually agree, Adam, more so with your account of what progressivism is, that it's what's progress, what's justice. You're saying, in your experience, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's still kind of ambiguous and it's hard to pin down. And I'm saying, well, from a Christian view, even if you disagreed with a Christian paradigm and you believed all of the sort of bumper stickers about it, right? You would have to agree that it's at least has cohesion. I'm not saying it's better because it has, I might actually be saying it's if it can be applied, is it better under your view, Adam? Because I'm arguing under your view. Me and Easy are granting the secular view here, or if you let me use that term, progressive view. We're granting that, and we're saying, okay, well, isn't it true under your view that Christianity is still more cohesive, that it's clearer in its normative position and how to
so I would say cohesion is necessary but not sufficient, because you can have cohesion but also exclusion. I think is going to be a much bigger issue with Christianity that does not necessarily exist to the same extent with progressivism. I would admit fully, I think if we're having a good faith discussion, that yes, when it comes to progressivism, there is probably more ambiguity and more of like learning as you go. But I think that is a sign of humility and honesty with how these things work. And I think, like, sure, it's true that with a preordained system of values and ethics with Christianity that are very hyper specifically defined, or Islam or anything else, you might have more concrete parameters to judge it based on. But I think the concreteness is not sufficient to say this is a better system than something that's maybe a little more ambiguous and you have to figure it out over time.
But what you would at least say, sorry, one more question, Easy, sorry. Would you at least concede that cohesion would actually be a necessary precondition if it were to be better?
Sure.
Okay. So you would say, at least give us a point that we're ahead of you on the preconditions for what might be better.
And Evan said earlier, Christianity and progressivism are not mutually exclusive. I'm sure there's many aspects of Western understandings of morality and society that are probably somewhat influenced by the Christian tradition. And I don't have an issue with that. The issue I have with a Christian society, as I think you're defining it, is that it is by definition going to exclude certain types of people, and I think lead to certain negative externalities that could be remedied with, yes, a more ambiguous, more iterative system, which I think is progressivism.
Easy, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I guess, to make it a little bit more simple too. And I do want to clarify so we can actually start progressing more too. But when you guys like progressivism is better than Christianity, is it better in terms of like a cultural?
I think the concreteness is not sufficient to say this is a better system than something that's maybe a little more ambiguous and you have to figure it out over time.
But what you would at least say, sorry, one more question, Easy, sorry. Would you at least concede that cohesion would actually be a necessary precondition if it were to be better?
Sure.
Okay. So you would say, at least give us a point that we're ahead of you on the preconditions for what might be better.
And Evan said earlier, Christianity and progressivism are not mutually exclusive. I'm sure there's many aspects of Western understandings of morality and society that are probably somewhat influenced by the Christian tradition. And I don't have an issue with that. The issue I have with a Christian society, as I think you're defining it, is that it is by definition going to exclude certain types of people, and I think lead to certain negative externalities that could be remedied with, yes, a more ambiguous, more iterative system, which I think is progressive.
So yeah, with secular humanists and progressive, it always comes down to the same thing. But my gays or but my trans. Even if they, like nowadays in 2025, even if they don't believe that gay marriage is legitimate, even if they think that being a homosexual is a sin, I think Christianity now is more tolerant of homosexuals than ever before.
Easy, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I guess, to make it a little bit more simple too. And I do want to clarify so we can actually start progressing more too. But when you guys say better, like progressivism is better than Christianity, is it better in terms of like a cultural sense? Like if today society comes to an agreement that we have a specific set of cohesion that we're going to strive for, and we have specific goals, this could also change 100 years from now. Is that kind of the position you guys are taking to understand?
I think that the changes are happening in a certain direction. So like there's going to be evolution and things that change over time, but I don't think that's an arbitrary change. I think it's like, if you want to get into like maybe evolutionary biology, that there is probably some direction this is moving towards. I think things like religion and all these different things we used to regulate how people ought to behave, how they ought to perceive the world, are probably going to be guided by some set of like natural selection or some kind of, like, as I was saying, an iterative process. So I'm not saying there's going to be things that we're not going to miss. There's probably going to be a lot of problems that the system itself allows you, though, to iron out those problems, identify them, and change them because of its adaptability. Whereas I think in Christianity, there isn't that self-correcting mechanism that would allow you to overcome those kinds of hurdles, and you're kind of like set in stone.
So, but what is progressivism itself? What is it going to lead to? Because I know you guys said that freedom is going to derive from society or whatever virtues we come up with. But what exactly are we going towards? Like, if we say, okay, we're going to implement progressive values and we're all going to live according to this, what exactly is it going to lead to? What's the end result?
Trying to eliminate as many social, cultural, economic, and political obstacles as possible that would preclude someone from being able to freely decide to live a virtuous life such that they are contributing to the harmoniousness of society.
Right. I think the goal is fundamentally going to be creating a society that enables people to pursue both the more rudimentary, universal like goods in society, such as like the material, and then their deeper, more psychological purposes like creativity and connecting with others. And that's going to be, obviously that's going to be there's going to be variety across individuals and communities, but we do have, for example, outcomes to look at with specific things that we would mark as being progressive. So, for example, having a strong welfare system, we do have nations to look at that when those sorts of policies are implemented, we can actually take a look at what exactly those outcomes are relative to, for example, Christian societies, which doesn't actually have any clear outlined economic policy.
Well, but even in that specific example, like the welfare system, what outcome are you looking for? Is it family? Is it income? Is it
reduction in poverty? And yeah, I would say that would be the number one thing with welfare, and then also economic mobility.
What if
because economic mobility and poverty are obstacles to pursuing those virtues?
What if you found that a lot of people who are in poverty are happy? Would you infringe on them and give them money? Or
I'm not forced to accept anything. I mean,
well, then you'd have to say, okay, but if it's the case that in many countries the poorest people actually, through their adoption, I should say, of religion, even if it wasn't Christianity, if they're happy, right, with that, even though they're poor, what would your prescription for that be?
Are they happy as a function of their poverty, or are they happy in despite of their poverty? Because I think that's the deeper question. And if you're saying they're happy as a function of their poverty, theoretically, yes, if people are happy because they're poor, then I guess it would make sense.
Well, you're saying
that's not obviously the case.
Yeah, but then why solve poverty then, from your view, then, if it's not to increase happiness? What is it to do?
I think when you remove those kinds of obstacles, it opens up like the aperture of what people can pursue and how they choose to live life. And the more, like I was saying, political, social, cultural obstacles are there, the more that aperture is narrowed in terms of what path they can go down. So I would just argue that in the absence of poverty, people probably have the ability and the freedom to make better decisions. And sure, you can argue when you widen that aperture, you also increase like the badness or like the wrongness of decisions they can make as well, which is why I would say it's not just that freedom and opening up the aperture in and of itself is good, but you want to give people as much freedom as possible within certain bounds, and then have incentive structures in place such that they are able to pursue what we would call good ends or virtuous.
We already have a lot of these structures in place. See, the thing is with having a free society, which is what these progressives want, is that you're in a free society, you're going to have really rich people and you're going to have poor people. But do the poor people have opportunities to get themselves out of poverty and become, millionaires or even billionaires? It's actually shown that yes, they do. There's a lot of celebrities that are rich, that are famous, that have come from poor backgrounds, that come from poor communities. So we already have systems in place, like a free society, which is what we already have now. It already accounts for that. And the thing is, when you force, let's say if there's people living in poverty that they're already happy, they don't really need more in life. They're happy where they're at. They got their family, they got their community, and you know what? They got all their needs met. They got our happiness met. But when you tell them, nah, you shouldn't be living like this, you actually need government assistance because it's bad for you to live this way, you're taking away actually their freedoms. You're actually making it less free because you're enforcing a belief that they need to live a certain way. And for the people who are in poverty that need a government assistance or some kind of welfare, they already have access to it. We already have systems in place by the government where if people need money or some sort of financial assistance, they have access to it. At least if you're meet the poverty line, because I mean, yeah, if you're middle class and you need some kind of financial assistance, yeah, you're kind of effed.
And we don't have to speak in theoretics. We know empirically that at the very least, there's a certain threshold of income and economic stability that people need, or at the very least, their satisfaction with life grows to up until that point.
So does progressivism incentivize family and procreation?
If that enables people to live a more fulfilling life, then sure.
Okay.
It sounds like a lot of your guys is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like the ultimate goal is just giving people more options. So it's not necessarily like value family, value a specific structure of the economy. It's more or less just giving people the option to decide what they want to do.
And then ideally structuring things in such a way that they would make what I would think there is probably a correct option to pick, or a set of correct options they can pick. So like that's why I was saying earlier, I don't want to conflate progressivism with like hedonism or consumerism. I think there's a lot of negative things that we probably all four of us can agree on. And I would not say that like just because someone freely decides to do something that it makes it inherently virtuous or good. Maybe it can be amoral and not really have moral value either which way. But I would say that like when we talk about limiting poverty, people, when they don't have that kind of anxiety weighing them down and narrowing the way they view the world, they can probably engage in like a lot more virtuous behavior when they're free to do that.
Adam, what in addition to just pure consumerism and materialism does progressive have offer that Christianity doesn't? Because Christian view, we accept that there are circumstances of the world and scarcity, and it's not like we take a position against, let's say, making money or using your talents and skills. It's just that Christianity offers human beings a distinction between the material world and the spiritual practice. And ultimately, I really don't see from a progressive view what else you guys are offering other than pure consumerism, materialism, and
our view doesn't preclude or neglect what you're laying out. You can totally live under that framework within a progressive society. We're just saying that when you have the adaptability of a progressive society, there are built-in self-corrective mechanisms that allow you to maybe still have that kind of like driving force of people moving towards, like, I want people to have families and reproduce and all this stuff. That's all great. But like, I want people to choose to do that. And if someone is, for example, gay, I don't think it's wrong for them to not have children. I think it'd be great if they got married and had a family as a gay couple. That'd be awesome. But like, I just don't think that these parameters can be as strictly and sort of like harshly defined as I think Christianity would do.
And I don't think it's fair to associate economic stability with consumerism or hedonism in economic sense. I think that part of what economic stability offers is time of leisure, and that includes time for expressing creativity, working on something that isn't necessarily economically productive, or time spending time with loved ones, which both we know again from empiricism increase satisfaction.
Okay, but what is let's say you mentioned homosexuality and two dudes renting the womb of a woman to have a kid. What does that offer your utility based society?
I mean, I'd want them to be good parents, obviously. I mean, it depends, again, devil's in the details, a lot of these things. As long as they're being good parents that are instilling their children with the same values we've been talking about this whole time, I think that'd be a good thing. I don't think that inherently a couple being heterosexual is the defining factor that makes it good or bad.
I'm just wondering what it offers.
It offers the fulfillment of being a parent, if that's something that somebody wants to have, despite being, homosexual in their sexuality. It offers them that fulfillment.
So fulfillment. So, I mean, if it offered them fulfillment for 5 men to be in a house and they call themselves whatever you would call it, what is that, a quintuple? And they bought some kids, you'd be totally fine with 5 gay dudes in a house, I think, raising one kid, right? What's that? Say it again, Adam.
I think pentuple.
Pentuple. Yeah, I don't know what it is. But would you guys advocate for that if they said, "Listen, progressive Evan and Adam, I'm so glad you guys are our representatives. Can you make it so 5 dudes can marry each other and raise one kid?" If they thought that was going to give them happiness, you'd advocate for it, right?
Well, the outcomes also depend on the actual child's like whether or not the actual child is going to be, living a fulfilled life. But I don't have any sort of empiricism to prove that one way or the other, and neither do you. So I don't necessarily see that, and I don't actually see how that's necessarily entailed as being wrong from the Christian worldview either.
And if we find out at some point that like have too many parents,
quickly, guys,
the thing is, under progressivism, though, talked about earlier about how, well, they're just learning how they go along. Okay, so why don't we start trying to have it where if 5 dudes wanted to raise a kid, why not try it? You guys are learning as you go, right? And if it turns out that having 5 guys, 6 men, 7 women, or whatever, raise 1 child is not good for society, well, it doesn't matter. All these kids are hurt now. I guess my point is right now that progressivism is kind of ridiculous, but also to this whole, well, we try it out as we go. I mean, if under that system, then why wouldn't it be okay to have 5 guys raising a kid?
I'll do this for a few more minutes, and then Evan and Adam, you guys are going to be able to cross-examine for half an hour. We'll get 3 more minutes of this.
Cool.
Easy. Anything left there?
Sorry, my stream for some reason cut off. It cut off like twice already. But I was going to ask, well, like even there's no empiricism you said for the homosexuality example. What kind of threshold are we going to be looking for as far as when we implement some sort of duties or say this is wrong and this is right? Is it just outcome based? Because even that, letting them act on that thing is going to be a precondition to the outcome.
There are probably certain tendencies that if you behave in a certain way, then it typically is going to entail certain types of outcomes. You might be able to find specific instances where that isn't necessarily borne out. So like, for example, if we discover through some kind of psychological, increasing of our knowledge that like having too many parental figures in a family is objectively detrimental to the progression or development of a child, then I might be taking like a different response to what you're saying. But as of now, it just seems like it's sort of like an arbitrary like factor that I'm not sure would necessarily entail some kind of negative outcome.
Even when you measure the outcome of the child's progress or trajectory in life, you said it's an objective metric. By whose metric? Like whose objective metric? What exactly are we going to be looking for in terms of this is a good way that the kid is being raised, or this is not a good way that the kid is developing?
They're behaving in a way that perpetuates the type of harmonious system we would want to keep upheld. So like I said, I do believe there are certain things that are virtue, certain things that people, certain ways people ought to view the world and ought to conduct themselves. I don't think everything is just, like Evan said, we're not libertarians.
And I think in the cases where, and this is important just as a clarification, in the cases in which there are going to be nuances to what exactly the pros and cons are of specific outcomes. So like this happens in policy all the time. We know that some economic policies may have externalities, but it's a matter of weighing out the pros and the cons. The method through which and determining what exactly the decisions are going to be made is going to be through that process of rigorous debate and reason and empiricism, which is why progressivism encourages pluralism.
Okay, but you guys, just to make sure I understand though, you guys said that there's got to be some sort of cohesion and a social norm that we are to uphold. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay, and then if there's like a specific, like a small percentage of individuals that want to come in and disrupt the entire flow of how society ought to behave because there's cohesion in it, we probably shouldn't allow that, correct?
Depends on how you mean exactly, like what specifically you mean by that. But like I said, we want to push people to choose to not behave in that way as best as we can. If people, despite all of those incentives, are still deciding to act in that way.
No, he's asking a more direct question. Obviously, this will be the last one, but I'll rephrase it for you. Let's say from whatever metric you have, which I still don't know what it is, how you know you've obtained harmony, right? Let's say you've reached peak harmony. Easy saying, let's say a cluster of people come in, they're in the society and they start disrupting what you, by your metrics, say is harmony. We're asking, how could you argue from your own position to exclude them? Because now they're pursuing your paradigm inside your paradigm. They're just doing what you're saying. They're creating harmony for themselves, and it requires. Exclusive.
I actually think that in a way it may be that. So I guess it really depends on the specific example and what you mean by disruption. But I would use something, for example, like the existence of trans people as an example of this, where disruption can actually encourage, for example, I guess, progressive, rigorous debate, because there is a small group of people that are disrupting something that normally we understood as being these rigid, strict gender norms, and the society around them, through their disruption, has adapted to incorporate them and also change its own.
You mean force us to lie? You mean force us to lie by disruption?
No, No, it's not a lie. And unless you
of
and
course
unless
it's a
you
lie.
have a and unless you
And force
actually
is
have
a
well, unless you actually have a substantive like unless you actually believe that like trans people are substantively lying about their identity rather than just your semantic misunderstanding.
No,
of
I'm saying
what
you
male
can't.
and feminine is.
I'm saying you can't offer a referent for what a trans person is. Therefore, forcing other people to refer to something there's no referent for is forcing them to lie.
Can you
when
clarify
you
what
say
you mean by
forcing, do you
referent?
mean like by the government, or that there's like some kind of
No,
cultural or
socially.
social
No, no.
pressure?
Like, yeah, social pressure. For instance, the government is included. By the way, there are schools in the state that I'm in that compels the teacher to affirm a position that a child takes about their own identity, and they're forced to affirm it. Otherwise, they could be sued or fired. That's coercive, forcing the person whose identity, let's say Christian, forcing them to lie. Is that disharmony or harmony?
I wonder if Jim Bob's in California, because here in California, yeah, you if a child is identifies as the opposite gender, their teachers they're not allowed to inform the parents at all. So they're forcing teachers and the schools to keep and even the child to keep secrets from their own parents and to lie to their own parents.
I can't speak to the specific example you just gave, so I don't want to delve into that too much. But I would say like anything that is against the general principles of the First Amendment, I would not be in favor of that, because I think that there are, like Evan was saying, like there's costs and benefits to all this stuff, and you're gonna have to absorb some kind of cost to move in a direction that we think is socially harmonious. And I want to add one more thing you said earlier, like you don't know what exactly we mean when we talk about like progress and movement, and this might be sort of like a abstract way to illustrate this, but I think it's helpful if anyone here knows like mathematics. You guys know what an asymptote is? An asymptote is like it's like a function that's like always approaching a certain number, but it never fully gets there. Like as you zoom in more and more, there's always going to be like
there's
some
no
gap.
one, it's always 99. Like
There's like a tendency towards a certain discrete value, but it's never going to actually be reached. You just decrease like the level of the delta, I guess, between where you are and where you want to be.
Yeah, but that's disanalogous, Adam, because even in that example, the target of what you're reaching. We're saying you don't even have the target.
But we know that there is a
guys,
target, I guess, is
we're
what I'm
gonna
saying.
have
We know
to
there's a target.
move this on.
We know
Never
what a target.
time.
Okay.
Never a good
there is
time
a
to
And
target.
it
You don't know
becomes
what it
more
is.
apparent what that is as we decrease that delta. We can
How would you
narrow
know
the
that?
aperture of what we're
How would you
considering
know
as
what
the
it is?
target.
Yeah.
Well, how can you reach closer to a goal if you don't even have a goal? That doesn't make any sense. So I gotta say, these progressives are a little bit more tolerable than the usual lunatic progressives that I've covered on this channel, or even the secular humanists that I've talked about on this channel. They seem just more misguided than anything, but they're still wrong. I mean, needless to say. And I thought Jim Bob here and even Easy here did a great job debating them, getting down. I thought this was actually pretty good back and forth and pretty good debate. If you enjoyed watching this, I highly encourage you to watch the rest of this. I will have the link to the original clip down below in the description. So if you want to watch the rest of the debate, I only covered so much of it, but it is much longer. So if you want to see where this goes, what happens in the rest of the video, the link is down below for you in the description. Well, how do you guys think Jim Bob and Easy did? Sound off in the comment section below. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to my channel. You'll be helping me out a lot. And I have a whole bunch more content just like this that you can binge on and enjoy.